Hello and welcome to Community Thinkers, a broadcast series from the Summit Hill Association. Thanks for joining us. In this series, we hear from one of St. Paul's most thoughtful people about issues that matter to our neighbors here in St. Paul, and in Summit Hill specifically. I'm Sherry Johnson. I'm a process guide, inclusion trainer, and complexity coach, and I'm also a board member here at Summit Hill Association.
I'm David Kratz. I'm an urban planner. I was on the board for almost 5 years until I recently moved. I co-chaired the neighborhood plan committee with Sherry.
Awesome.
We're hosting a series to engage our community as we renew our neighborhood plan. We're finding that the more we learn about planning, sustainability, racial equity, and economic development, the more we realize how much more there is to learn.
Thanks, David. It's good to see you. David just recently left the board. He finally completed that long term of board service. So thank you for your service, David, and thanks for joining us today. So everybody, this show is for you. So after we get things started, we'll turn to the chat where we'll share your questions with our guest today. Before we learn from today's community thinker, we invite you to comment, ask questions in the thread below. What brought you here today? We would love to know. Go ahead and introduce our guest, David.
Yeah, our community thinker today is Mary Morse Marti. She's a sustainability leader in the Twin Cities. She founded HOURCAR, and she's a former executive director of Move Minneapolis and the St. Paul Neighborhood Energy Consortium, which has now merged with the Center for Energy and Environment. Mary's expertise spans urban food production and community gardens, home energy conservation, children's lead hazard reduction, and a full variety of sustainable transportation planning. We'll talk today about transportation, sustainability, and neighborhood planning implications for Summit Hill. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you, David. It's great to see you, and Sherry too.
Just kick things off, what connections do you have to Summit Hill or any neighborhoods like it, whether it be Grand Avenue, etc.?
Oh, this is where I can take you back on a time machine journey. I came to St. Paul from the little river town of Champlin, Minnesota at 18 to go to McAllister. And I was here, let's go back to 1978. And I moved to Summit Avenue. I lived in the beautiful Dupre Hall right on Summit and Snelling. And then I moved around St. Paul for the next 4 years and moved to Summit Hill in 1980. I lived at 881 Lincoln and 941 Goodrich. We had a party that got shut down 1 year. Other than that, I was an exemplary neighbor. I remember when Victoria Crossing was not Victoria Crossing, and the first year it opened, I applied for jobs there around the corner from my house on Lincoln, and I had 2 offers, one from Haagen-Dazs and the other one from Garden of Eden. So I took the Garden of Eden job and I worked there for several years.
I loved Garden of Eden. That was such a great place.
Yeah. It was awesome. I loved living in Summit Hill. I miss it. So I still live in St. Paul. We moved around the country a little bit, came back, lived in Minneapolis. Now I live in this little section of neighborhood that we are very fancy about. We call it Shadow Falls, which is the far west piece of Merriam Park. I live right across from Town and Country Golf Course off of Marshall.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm really close by.
I just passed there the other day. Yeah, that's a cool little area. I didn't know what existed.
Yeah, it's awesome living here. The thing I miss is we don't have the commercial districts that you do in Summit Hill. It's getting better as we add density, but we've got Copland's, thank heavens. We have a few restaurants, but it's not dense enough. We need more people, we need more commercial. And I love the 21 bus. 21 is we have 2 date night buses. 21 is one of them when we go to Uptown, and the 63 is the other one when we have to go down to downtown St. Paul to Mary.
63 was my jam for a while too, yeah.
Yeah. So maybe today we can talk about taking dates on the bus.
I'm doing an electric bike date tonight, so.
Oh, I am so jealous.
Anyway, David, you're supposed to ask the next question. I'm totally all over you. Go for it.
So Mary, when did you move back then?
Well, let's see. We were here until 1984, and then we moved to Arizona, Tucson, Arizona. Then we moved back and owned a house in Minneapolis for 8 years, and then we moved to Washington, D.C. Then we moved back in 1997. So I've lived in the current house on Exeter Place for 24 years.
Okay.
It blows my mind. I never thought I was coming back to St. Paul, but I did. It pulls you in. It's fabulous here.
So you've gotten a good sampling. You know, especially I think I'm trying to weave my way into this question, right? So you've been back and forth to different cities, and you know you'll see different cities in snapshots of time. You've been here for 20 plus years now. What trends have you seen? What have you seen from going between those different cities, like specifically transportation trends? How have the Twin Cities changed from your time here in a way?
Yeah, that's a great question. When I was 16, the bus cost less than 50 cents to take from Anoka High School to my house. So that was our activity bus. And now, it's $2, so it's still quite a bargain. What has changed? I think the most hopeful things that I see in the Twin Cities especially is bus rapid transit. We're starting to look at speed as a very important part of transit use, so speed and frequency. And the Twin Cities, Metro Transit is a national leader in BRT development. We're going to have these very fast, very convenient buses. I mean, we have the A line. It was the first route to go BRT. And if folks haven't made their way west to Snelling on their way to the airport, it's so easy. Just jump on the A line, transfer to the Blue Line at 46th Street Station, and you're there, no parking. It's fantastic. So BRT, number one, I think the Gold Line is going to be great for people in the East Metro. It's going to go from downtown St. Paul out to Woodbury, and they're building a dedicated lane for it. It's not on 94, it's close to 94, it's sort of close to the alignment. But that's going to be great. Like if I lived in Summit Hill and I was working at 3M, I know how I'd be getting there. I think, and Sherry mentioned this, I think the most exciting trend that is happening before our eyes, and it's happening so fast, is electric bicycles. If you haven't had
a car and bought 3 of them, that's where
you sold your car and bought 3 electric bicycles.
I did.
Okay, I need to speak no more. David, have you ridden one?
No, but I do have 3 bikes, so.
Okay. I love the bicycle. And I thought, I don't need an electric bike. Plus, I've got this thing because I'm old, and you sort of try to hang on to your youthfulness and say, I can bike anywhere under my own power. And then I practiced on a Nice Ride electric bike. And then the next time I was going somewhere, I would pass my regular bike, one of the electric bikes that was sitting on its kiosk, and I drooled. I had this Pavlovian response to it. Like, I know that if I go on that bike, I'm going to go really fast. And I want one so bad. And my friends are all getting cargo bikes, electric cargo bikes. I mean, these are not cheap pieces of equipment, but when you realize that you don't have to use a car anymore for most of your trips, your daily trips, most people go to the bank, they go to the grocery store, they go to work. I mean, work has got to be the easiest thing to go on transit to, biking and transit. Work is never that far away. If it is, move. So that's the other trend. I want to talk about a negative trend that I've seen, and this is nationwide. The trend toward bigger vehicles. I looked at the list of car sales in the United States, and the upsizing is out of control. And I'm going to read through a few here. The F-Series, the Ford F-Series truck is the #1 selling vehicle by far. It's like it just wastes all the other things. Then followed by the Chevy Ram pickup truck, Chevy Silverado pickup truck. After that, you get the little crossover SUVs. And here's where I say, guilty, guilty, guilty. I bought a Honda CRV. I'm going to write about it. I want you to look for this. I'm going to see if I can get it published in the Star Tribune or the Pioneer Press. And because it makes me feel terrible now, but I still have it. And now I don't know what to do with it because
But one thing that's important about the CRV is it doesn't have that giant blocky grill that kills people, which has been a trend.
But it does. When you stand next to it and you try to figure out where your sensitive organs are, it's like you're gonna get nailed by my SUV if I'm not careful.
Yeah.
I will kill you. It is horrible. I wasn't even thinking about that. And David, you are so right. The whole what is it called? The front of them, the profile. They're high profile.
Yeah.
Grill, something, yeah.
Grills. It's just the high profile. It's gonna kill people. And they let's see. I have that stat here. The federal safety regulators have shown, and this is for years, that SUVs and big trucks are twice as likely to kill pedestrians, joggers, and children if they strike them.
Wow.
I didn't know. I mean, it doesn't mean I'm innocent here, but how many of us think, well, in particular, I'm like, I'm going to buy this because I don't drive very often. It sits in my garage most days. My spouse and I are getting up there. We're going to be traveling more. You know, we like to hike. We wanted a little clearance so that we could get into the Wyoming back roads a little bit. I didn't know. And you know, and now I think it's up to all of us to fix that. So sad.
Yeah. So we're going to shift gears a little bit to talk about climate change, because very related topic. And just kind of shift it back to our neighborhood. One of the reasons we're having this show, the biggest reasons, is to talk about implications for neighborhood planning, right? And there may not be enough, anything we can do about big grilled trucks besides, spread awareness. But in addressing climate change, how is a neighborhood organization's time best spent? How can Summit Hill residents' time be best spent too?
Yeah. I think that there are really two kind of divergent trains of thought on this. One is that we all can make our own decisions, that we have individual choices that we make. Like I don't fly as much as I used to, because that's a huge contributor to climate change. I bought this stupid SUV, but I don't drive it very often. I drive it maybe twice a week, and I drive it generally really short distances. I planted as many trees in my yard as I possibly could. So I'm making these choices. Other people say that stuff doesn't matter at all, that it's kind of a, this is, what's the word? Is it a red herring? It just, we think we're doing something, but we're not. Is that what it's called? I always mess up my concepts. But the bigger things, when Summit Hill Association is trying to tackle climate change, it's really making room for big change. And I think after this week, after what we have seen happening in Germany and the Netherlands and Flagstaff, Arizona, watching cars and dump trucks roaring down the streets that are now being flooded, seeing the streets of Flagstaff covered in mud. People are actively dying now in the global north. We are sadly, very sadly,
in Portland, people are dying.
Portland. And how about some fires and some drought? I have never been more freaked out than I have been in the last 2 weeks in my entire life. And I've been working on this stuff forever. I am truly sad about what we're facing. So a neighborhood association, go for the big things. Make sure everybody understands climate change, that they understand as much as they need to about the science so that they know this is serious and that they know how we have to make these changes, and then go for the big ones. Rezone. Make sure that the people who are priced out of the neighborhood now and are going out to past Lakeville to create new communities of cheap townhouses because they can't afford to live in the city, plus there's no place to buy or rent, make sure they have a place to live and go for density. It's really okay. And I know this has been a big problem in Summit Hill, as it has been in many neighborhoods. Building density, even if it's moderate, is going to do so much to stop climate change because people will not be driving. You just normalize things.
There's a disconnect, right? That can be a hard place to get to. People don't often understand or think about density as being about climate change at all. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, if it's only possible for me to live this life of lower carbon emissions because I am close to everything I need. I am not, I don't have to get in my car for everything. And, we know that transportation accounts for almost a third of climate emissions. It's the #1 cause, as a sector of climate change. So we need to get people out of their vehicles, and that can mean they bike, they walk, they use transit, or they don't make trips anymore. It is absolutely direct. I mean, we cannot be, we cannot emphasize that enough, that our choices on where to live have a huge impact on climate. Folks who live in the suburbs, what are we doing? We are building concrete, which is a different sector, concrete for building highways. That's another climate impact generator. We're building new sewers, we're building roads, we're creating all new infrastructure, and it's just wrecking it. It's wrecking our ability to live carbon-free. Even if everybody gets an electric car, even if, we still have to pay for those roads and highways, and we are still responsible for allowing 40,000 Americans to die every year because of cars. So I am an unapologetic car hater, whether that car is internal combustion or electric. I mean, let's be clear. I started a car share. I don't hate cars, but I've seen what cars do, and I've seen how we are beholden to them for pretty much every part of our lives. And this is not the way to live. We were talking about the carbon impact of density or not density, and I think I wanted to just encourage Summit Hill Association to look at density so that we can create vital neighborhoods. I mean, the thing about having folks walking on the street and having bicycles and bike lanes, that creates vitality, and that's what we're after here. So that's really important for me.
Thank you. David, go ahead and take your next question on transportation.
Yeah, in the Twin Cities, what transportation inequities do you see, whether it be racial or otherwise? And do you see Summit Hill Association playing a role in addressing any of those?
Mm-hmm. I think the first thing is to acknowledge that basing a transportation system on cars is fundamentally inequitable. I mean, we have this hidden cost that those of us in the field keep talking about, but I don't think other folks may hear enough. That is, what is the true cost to own and operate a car? It is you can't do it for less than $3,000 a year, and many vehicles, newer vehicles, are $10,000 a year, some even a little bit more. We don't think about how much it costs to own a car, to get to the fundamental things you need. So it's inequitable, to base our entire system of movement and connection on this thing that you have to own privately. So Sherry knows about HOURCAR. HOURCAR is a great way of not relying on this privately owned, incredibly expensive piece of equipment. And hopefully that will be helping folks in neighborhoods where individuals don't work for high wage employers. That's going to be very helpful and increase equity. So with this fundamental inequity, we have to look at transit systems. We have to look at things that allow people to walk and to be connected and to move safely at all times of day. Today on Twitter, I noticed that a friend was walking through a neighborhood pushing a wheelchair. No one was in it. They just did this as an exercise in trying to figure out how it would feel to move about the neighborhood in a wheelchair. It's not easy, even though a lot of stuff is ADA compliant now. Not everything is. That's a different kind of transportation equity. So we spend billions of dollars creating this beautiful, seamless car network. And what have we done for affordable, safe, accessible transportation in communities where people don't want to or cannot operate cars? It's all connected for me.
I'm reminded of a conversation we had with Terry Tao of Nexus Community Partners about equity and transit. And she pointed out that a lot of folks in communities of color actually rely on cars to get to jobs in the suburbs.
Mm-hmm.
How does everything you just said kind of tie up in that? How can we be a part of, dealing with that reality?
Yeah, and that is a reality. And this is one of those opportunities for us to be big thinkers and to say enough citing industry and jobs in the far reaches of our communities. The land is dirt cheap, right? It's literally dirt cheap. It's farmland in some cases. So companies are going to go out there and sometimes they'll get, tax breaks for siting there, and the community says, yay, we get this huge, meat processing plant or whatever it is, and it's great for our municipal coffers. But in the long term, how do people get there? Yeah, it's a production. The reverse commute is a huge production. I think it's too late to work on that with buses. And, if a company is going to move out of the transit belt, if they're off network, then they should be responsible. It should be an ordinance or a law. They should be responsible for providing transportation to their workers. It's not okay anymore.
And it's not if you go out to Seattle, those tech companies all provide transportation for their workers.
They do.
Yeah.
They do.
Yeah, Mary, didn't Move work on, one of Move Minneapolis's goals was setting up transit passes with employers, right?
Yeah.
What was your experience with that? Was it easy? Was it a one-sided conversation depending on the company?
Here's the dirty little secret about employer-provided transit passes. Employers who have the money to attract an expensive workforce, they're happy to provide those. It's just a benefit that they know people want. We realized, I would say about halfway through my career at Move Minneapolis, that we were serving a ton of wealthy white-collar workers. And we had completely neglected people who work for low-wage employers. And so we were starting to pivot into that direction. I was really very proud of that, because the folks who need transit passes the most are the folks who make the least. And their employers aren't going to pay them anymore, without being forced to. So we definitely want to encourage Metro Transit to develop passes for everyone. And I think that they could do best if they would go ahead and just decouple the transit pass benefit from the employer and make it a universal pass for everyone at a very affordable rate. And I think they would end up making up in volume far more than they would make up in the loss of their $83 monthly Metro Pass. I mean, they have
on the neighborhood level that we could be a part of in any of this that we're talking about.
In as far as pass development,
equity and transportation networks, I guess.
Yeah. Well, in your plan, make sure that you are prioritizing bicycles and pedestrians and transit. I would immediately build protected bike lanes on St. Clair, on Grand Avenue, on Summit Avenue, on Dale, and Victoria and Lexington. I think I've got the neighborhood covered there. They should have, Jersey barriers, whatever it takes, not the stupid little bollards that we had up here near Carbucks on Snelling and Marshall. Carbucks, which now it has no drive-through because they finally realized they were going to kill people.
But we have covered this earlier in our show with Lynn. So, go ahead.
Fabulous. It's a recurring theme.
Yes.
But I mean, the thing we need to do for equity is to make the least expensive, healthiest modes available to everyone. So I would want my 85-year-old parent to be able to walk safely to the university club, as much as I would want my 7-year-old kid to be able to go over to Walgreens and buy a piece of candy without worrying about a right turner, without worrying about any danger from cars whatsoever. And then I want folks who are biking and using electric bikes, they should have priority. These people are not causing any damage to the environment. They are not causing any damage to anything. In fact, studies show they spend more money locally. I mean, these are the people you want coming to your businesses. You don't want car drivers. I mean, why would we prioritize the guy from Egan who wants to come in and day drink, and he doesn't want to park 3 blocks away? Why wouldn't we prioritize this, this 70-year-old guy who lives around the corner and is going to spend money every single day? He's going to go to that hardware store and see his community and spend money. I mean, this is how it works. This is equity for me. This is equity for age, for income, and it is the only way we're going to create the kind of community that people want to live in over the long term.
Or lower the barrier to entry.
What are the barriers to entry?
Owning a car, I mean.
Wow. So we have another question for you, Mary. How does land use affect transportation and vice versa?
Land use, man, it's all about land use. It really is. Who built the streetcar system? It was Thomas Lowry. And that was 1890, I think, 1890. And you know what? That streetcar, it was an electric streetcar, and it completed Summit Hill. Summit Hill was a bunch of big mansions. It was, it was the Hill Mansion, and it was other mansions. It was the guy who founded McAllister, Mr. Neal. And so they started moving up the hill down Summit Avenue, but the whole neighborhood didn't get fully built out until this trolley came. And the streetcar, so Summit Hill is a streetcar suburb, which is really kind of funny to think about. So the people who live there for decades without cars. They walked, they took horses, that's what they did. There's little corner stores scattered all over the place. There are all those 2.5-story walk-up apartments that came along. Well, those people didn't own cars. They didn't have to, and they were family apartments. And then at a certain point, Grand Avenue became the center of car culture in St. Paul. Did you know, let's see, Victoria Crossing had a gas station in the northeast corner. So where Jute Salon is, that was a gas station. The first one, I think, where Bread and Chocolate was a Chevy dealership. And Studebaker was on the corner where the food place, Cafe Latte. That was Studebaker. So it was all car culture. Oh, and the Ace Hardware was a gas station too, or a service station. So that was
so many service stations up and down.
Yeah. I mean, the car culture that changed, and people moved in, and we just really need to look at. Well, we're talking about land use again. It comes back to vacancies. It comes back to density. Let's build a huge residential community on Grand Avenue.
David, go for it.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry.
Well, we got a couple questions from Siggy here. Thanks for following us, by the way, Siggy. And sorry for pronouncing your name wrong, but from our 2 different streams here. I think the first question that she had in the first chat related to diet, and her second comment is kind of getting at that too. How should we think about diet when it comes to climate change? How, if we do talk about personal responsibility and climate change, where does diet come into that?
Yeah.
And there was a little bit of comment too, like could diet choices offset transportation costs, et cetera?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the diet thing is fascinating, and it's not only personal, it's another one of these big systemic issues. The way we've developed animal agriculture, and all of our cattle and pigs are being fed corn and soybeans, which are not their normal diets, so they're all sick all the time, and then we get sick and there's no real food, and it all contributes methane and other climate emissions, especially from running farm equipment and throwing on. It's a mess. It's a mess. So yeah, we could change our diets. We could have black beans a few more days of the month, and that would be great. I see an idea about having some streets for bicycles, walkers, and some streets for cars. That works in some places. I see it's $5 per round trip. Oh, we're talking about buses.
Yeah, it's some math on, if you stick solely to transit has a cost as well. I think she's getting at.
Right. You can do a car. Yeah, that's why I'm promoting this idea that maybe we go to free transit. And we subsidize highways and cars tremendously, well above and beyond the gas tax. I mean, that's the tip of the iceberg. So if we could subsidize transit as well as we subsidize cars and car infrastructure, it would be far cheaper to use that bus. Yeah, and family flexibility. We can talk about flexibility. I'm not sure it really feels flexible to me to fear that my children are going to be hit by cars every day. I lived that. It's not fun to live in St. Paul and to have cars rushing up to I-94 on your neighborhood streets. It is terrifying. These are things I do not want for anyone.
Yeah, I'm thinking about some places I've lived that's basically an on-ramp to I-94 within, a mile of it. It's Lexington, but it feels like that sometimes.
Yeah, yep. We know folks are taking Dale and Lex and Snelling and Hamlin, and you know how to get to I-94. Can we talk about I-94 for a little bit?
Yes, that'd be great. Let's do that.
Okay.
There's a lot happening around I-94 right now, and we actually have two guests that know a lot about that. Okay.
I can give some quick background on the funding that's been committed, just so people know. I think so. Met Council committed, I think it was $150,000 towards just purely an anti-displacement study when we're talking about Reconnect Rondo, which is the land bridge from Chatsworth to Grotto, which is about a half mile. And then recently with the transportation budget that managed to not shut down where I work, there was, 6.2 million was appropriated to studying the possibilities of the land bridge and looking at cost estimating and community engagement, all of the above. But yeah, so there's some background on the Reconnect Rondo and the land bridge that has some serious funding committed towards it now.
Yeah.
And is there stuff going on at the federal level too with removal, or am I wrong?
Of course the infrastructure bill hasn't been approved yet, but yeah, there's already a lot of money set aside in the negotiations that are happening for projects just like this.
Yeah, it's very interesting to me how many communities around the country are looking not at rebuilding their highways, but removing them. And there is a growing movement in St. Paul and Minneapolis to look at this Rethinking I-94 project as kind of a pilot for removal, based on all of the climate emissions that we will be baking into the system if we rebuild it. And I would imagine MnDOT would want to expand it, that there would be at least some new lanes for maybe dedicated transit lanes, maybe additional lanes, keep cars moving fast for a little while before it becomes congested again. And so I know that the group that's working on I-94 is very respectful of the Rondo Land Bridge, but they're working on what's going to happen underneath the bridge. You know, do we want to keep this giant mega highway or right through the middle of some of the best parts of our city? Or do we want something new? So that things I've heard are boulevards. I've heard dedicated transit lanes. I've heard bike highways. I've heard taking some of this excess acreage and turning it into a dense housing community. You know, to think about Highland Bridge and pop some of that over here on I-94. And it's really interesting. And I think the people who are going after this are quite smart. We don't have to live with these things. I think that's what we're saying. And honestly, I think that's how a neighborhood can think of this. This is not a fait accompli. I crack up because I moved to St. Paul just after 94 was finished. It was like a decade later. And of course, there were very many people around then using it. It was not like it is now. But the whole highway existed to bring people from the center of the city out to the suburbs. And now it's full every day and all night long. Very interesting.
I lived next to 94 for about 10 years in the Dayton's Bluff neighborhood. And my house was the 7th loudest site in the entire state before it got its sound wall recently. Although who knows what will happen with the sound wall when the gold line cuts through it? Who knows? So I'm keenly aware of how interstates interact with everyday folks who live next to them as well. There's something called is it induced demand, something like that, about building more lanes. Can either of you talk more about that?
You build it and they will come. Like usually if you add a lane, because there's a lot of congestion, studies have shown that give it about 10 years and you'll be back to where you started.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's inevitable. And
is that true for bike lanes too, do you think?
We've never tried. Right? I use the Midtown Greenway when I go to Minneapolis, but it's never packed. There's always people on it, but it's never congested.
So I'm gonna address the elephant in the room, and I know that a lot of our neighbors, you know, when I talk with them about like the future and dealing with climate change and this need to walk and bike more, everybody says, but what about winter?
Mm-hmm.
What about winter? How can we survive without cars in frigid St. Paul, Minnesota?
Yeah. Okay. I will share my secrets. In the summer, I bike, but if I have a reason to not be sweaty, I won't bike. I'll use transit. In the winter, I don't bike. I could. I know how, but I'm not interested. So in the winter, I use transit. It's so nice. You know what? Transit's like having someone come to your neighborhood with a limousine and you get on. And unlike your own car, it's already warm or it's already cold. And the thing I miss the most about not working downtown right now is that I don't see my friends on the bus. You know, I was lucky enough I could take the 134, which is a limited stop, kind of an express, through Highland and Matt Groveland and Merriam Park, and then it just rocks down the highway, which it should always be able to rock down the highway, to downtown. And it's full of these great neighbors. You know, I wish everybody knew how great it was. Mm-hmm. So yeah, winter, get on the bus. Let's make sure our bus system works and that it goes everywhere. Let's just recreate the Thomas Lowry streetcar system with more, with shorter headways. Let's bring more buses into the system. And so that you never even have to think about having a schedule. 63 comes every 15 minutes. You don't really need a schedule to take the 63. Do you? I mean, I don't.
No.
You don't use Trolley on Grand Avenue. You have the 63.
Yeah. And then, of course, the other elephant in the room about expanding transportation and pedestrian friendliness is this concept, and Siggy brings it up in the chat as well, this safety, particularly for women, for kids. Can you talk a little bit about, if our neighborhood plan were to sort of switch into this idea of embracing, pro-climate walking, biking, transit, what about safety of those modes as opposed to cars?
Yeah, I can't tell you how much safer all transit, any transit is than driving or riding or being near a car. Like I said, if 40,000 Americans were killed in transit or by transit every year, I think we'd do something about it. We don't do a dang thing about that. Not a dang thing. The whole drumbeat about transit being unsafe has been created by business associations that want to beef up our cops and our police departments. I mean, this is a bunch of baloney. Yes, of course there are problems on transit, just as there are problems anywhere in any community, behind closed doors and on the street. People have problems, but transit is not unsafe. I've been using it my entire life. There are people on it who will make you feel uncomfortable, but you know what? I would rather feel a little uncomfortable than be run over by an SUV.
David, you want to say anything about that?
What? Why now? I don't think I have much to say on that.
Did you run over?
That was kind of a rough moment, I guess. So, Mary, something we ask every guest is, if you could snap your fingers and have your wish be granted, what do you wish everyone understood about transportation?
I wish everybody could really feel and experience how fantastic life would be in a world where we could all live in these wonderful, dense communities with great transit and wonderful sidewalks, where everybody felt safe and everybody had enough money, and how absolutely beautiful and exciting and fun these communities are, where there's places to go and hang out with your friends, and your children are safe and everything is good. I mean, I feel, this is another first world problem for me, because I have traveled quite a bit and I see these communities where that happens, and we should all want that. We should all want that. Can I snap my fingers and make it happen now?
We don't provide that service, but we do provide the thinking about that service. Just want to wrap up a last comment in chat here. How do you know, Siggy asks, how do you know if it would not be the same without cars? Not about safety, but she says, if I mapped out my workday, picking up kids, soccer, hockey, etc., that could be about 2 to 3 hours on transit. Not talking about safety, I'm talking about time.
Yeah. So
that is a huge one. Can you talk a little about that?
I hear you, Siggy, and I'm going to say something you might not want to hear, and I will respect you if you don't. We're going to have to change our lifestyles. Traveling soccer teams do not belong in America. They don't belong anywhere right now. Hockey shouldn't happen. Children should not leave their neighborhoods to be in elite teams, because it requires parents to drive and drive and drive and drive. These things must go. Our lifestyles are going to be different, and some of us, there are things I won't like about it. This is the price we're paying in order to survive as a species with the climate as it is. So we're going to change our lives. We're all going to have to face that. And we're going to face it starting now.
That's, wow. Thank you, Mary. A lot of our listeners are probably like, okay.
Such a happy guest.
Right. I know. Yes, in the place where traveling hockey and soccer teams are very, very celebrated. So anyway, Mary, thank you for your vulnerability and your willingness to just kind of get us thinking differently. And I'm hoping that you can kind of push the envelope on our thinking a little bit as we consider our plans. So something we do every show is honor our local nonprofit community. And what nonprofit would you like to highlight today, Mary?
I am going to thank you, first of all, for doing that, because I think it is a really wise and generous thing to offer your guests. And my pick would be the Sierra Club. I've been watching the local Sierra Club Land Use and Transportation Committee doing their work, and they are spectacular. I mean, these people are really working on our behalfs, and they're smart. And of course, they have their National Sierra Club, which makes them all the more effective. So thank you. Let's give all of our time and money to the Sierra Club.
Always been around. Mary, I know you're transitioning work, you're looking for new opportunities, but where can we keep up with you in the meantime?
I can't wait. This was the most fun I've had in ages. Thank you.
So we can follow you on Twitter, right?
Oh, yes.
What's your Twitter handle, Mary?
Very easy. At Mary Morse Marti, all one long word.
Like an email, nice.
Yep. Morse like Morse code, Marty with an I.
All right, David, take us out.
All right, with that, come to the end of our learning journey here at Summit Hill Community Thinkers. Share this on Facebook if you like what you're seeing. Like our page, follow our updates. I know when you like our page, you'll get notifications whenever we go live, and we think these live events are definitely worth your time.